What's up, everybody? I want to go over intermittent fasting today. A few people have reached out to me recently in the past few weeks about intermittent fasting and kind of what I thought. So I want to go over the research and give you my opinion of the research. I want to thank Alan Aragon and Lyle McDonald for some of the sources that I present in this presentation. So, what are the different types of intermittent fasting that are done in the research? Alternate day fasting, or ADF, which is actually the most researched, which is 24 hours of fasting followed by 24 hours of feeding. Then we have whole day fasting, which is usually 2 days of fasting during the week where you just eat nothing. They don't have to be Saturday and Sunday, they could be Sunday and Wednesday or something like that. And then we have time restricted feeding, which is the most popular among people trying to maintain as much lean body mass as possible while being in caloric deficit while wanting to intermittently fast. So that's usually between 14 and 16 hours of fasting followed by around 8 hours of feeding. What I used to do was I would fast until 1 and eat from 1 to 9 and then fast from 9 to 1 again. So it was 16 and 8. So my feeding time was 8 hours, my fasting time was 16. For females, I would probably recommend the shorter end, 14 hours. So alternate day fasting, which, like I mentioned before, 24 hours of fasting, followed by 24 hours of feeding, and usually at an ad libitum, which means you can kind of eat to your hunger cravings during your feeding windows, but you need to be mindful of having a caloric deficit. So I want to kind of go over a study by Catanesi et al., where they looked at 2 groups of obese women. One was alternate day fasting, and one was calorically restricted, so with a deficit of around 400 calories per day. In the 8 weeks, the results were very similar. But what was interesting was the alternate day fasters ate less calories per day, around an average of 300 calories less. So that's almost like 700 calories, 700 calorie deficit per day. And like I said, the weight loss was similar. So what do I think that attributes to? Probably their NEAT went down. They probably did absolutely nothing on their fasting day. They probably looked at it as an opportunity to do nothing, as well as just the body kind of, without food, your body kind of signals to not do anything. So that's probably what happened. And the problem with this study, the protein was not similar. The calorically restricted group ate more protein, so they would probably retain more lean body mass, which is definitely kind of a flaw in the research, which I would like to see normalized to see if there is a difference between alternate day fasting and calorically restricted people, if there is a loss in lean body mass similar or not. And insulin sensitivity did not change. Hilbrand et al., which was one of the first intermittent caloric restriction, intermittent energy restricted studies, found a loss of lean body mass, which is not like the last study. But hunger stayed elevated throughout the fasting, which was interesting. I would kind of think people would get used to not eating for 24 hours and kind of make it like a daily something they're, like a daily habit of not eating and kind of like losing the hunger signals because you're kind of used to not eating. From an evolutionary standpoint, this kind of makes sense, but it's a bit surprising. An upside is potentially fat oxidation was increased in this study. So time-restricted feeding, like I was talking about before, where someone fasts for 16 to 20 hours and has a 4 to 8 hour feeding window. This is great, but there still needs to be caloric restriction. So you still need to be in an energy deficit in order to lose weight. If your maintenance is 2,000 and you eat 2,500 calories, you will be in a 500 calorie surplus. It doesn't really matter because you don't eat. There is not like a magic effect to it at all. This is most likely the best for intermittent fasting caloric restriction because you are able to get in a few more protein feedings, stimulate muscle protein synthesis a few more times, and most likely the best for dieting. It would be good to kind of clump your training with your feeding window. So, for example, I started my feast at 1. I say I train at 2 and then have a big post-workout meal at 3:30 or 3 o'clock. I can eat a lot of food in that window, and breakfast, the calories I save, basically. So people claim increased productivity, better skin, better digestion, and I think it could be the case, but it's most likely due to being calorically restricted for months, potentially months of a surplus. Probably a lot of people have heard of Martin Berkan of leangains.com. He recommends supplementing with BCAAs pre-workout if you are fasted, and this probably is a good idea if you don't eat before. Also, it could be beneficial to get it in post-workout because you could be losing lean body mass because muscle protein breakdown is higher than muscle protein synthesis. So I wanted to go over a meta-analysis where they went over 40 studies of intermittent fasting energy restriction versus just regular energy restriction, and there's no changes between the groups in weight loss. As long as the deficit was there, they will still lose weight. And there's no difference in sex hormones, insulin sensitivity, thyroid, or cortisol levels. So that was interesting because you hear a lot of claims about GH being released with intermittent fasting. With the fasting, you release GH, which is growth hormone, which some people claim that it's anabolic. And no, fasting is not anabolic. There's actually nothing anabolic about fasting. In the physiological levels, it doesn't seem to make a difference about hormones. So what that means is if you start to take testosterone per week at 600 milligrams, then that's out of the physiological level, and you will see muscle gains. But in the physiological level range, you probably won't see anything. So what are some takeaways about this, and how can we apply it to our everyday life? So based on the research I presented, calories are still the most important for body weight change, and it really doesn't matter what part of the day you want to eat at, as long as you get your calories in and you create a deficit. You will still lose weight or gain muscle depending on how you set it up. More on that a little bit later. Like the time-restricted feeding, I would be sure to get enough daily protein, and I would err on the side of 3 meals. I don't think more is necessarily better, but you are stimulating muscle protein synthesis more, so you could have a pre-workout meal, a post-workout meal, then probably a pre-bed meal, and you'd probably cover your bases there. And you can eat bigger meals, which is cool. And a lot of people are nervous. Oh, if I fast, I won't retain lean body mass. Muscle protein breakdown will be way higher. And in the research, it kind of shows that if you do resistance training, you will retain lean body mass. The interesting thing is research is not as good showing that you will gain a ton of muscle while intermittently fasting. But as we know, muscle grows so slow, it's kind of hard to see that in an 8-week study. I kind of hypothesize that we can see similar gains in hypertrophy in the long run. I don't think it makes a huge difference. Maybe in 10 years, getting an extra protein feeding at breakfast will show benefits, but realistically, it's probably not measurable. So, like I mentioned before, due to skin, digestion, hormones, there's probably not a difference between calorically restricting and intermittent fasting, as long as you're in a deficit in regards to those. But some alternate day fasting has shown to better keep metabolic rate. So at 24 weeks after the study, they were in a much larger deficit, but their metabolic rate wasn't altered, which was pretty cool. So potentially it could be a good idea to alternate day fast, because you can create a big deficit and and not do as much damage on your metabolic rate. Can't believe I just said metabolic damage. Metabolic adaptation. So the main takeaway here is compliance over doing what's optimal. So if you're compliant and you can eat in 1 to 9 or however you want to set up your intermittent fast, it doesn't matter. That's probably better than doing what's best for muscle gain, but you hate it, you don't want to eat in the morning or something like that. That's probably the key takeaway with anything. Adherence is always number one. Some reasons you may want to try it if you're a small person who's not able to eat a lot of calories in a day. So if you can only eat 1,400 calories to maintain your body weight, you're probably a very small female or a very small male, really small male. It's probably a good idea to say, okay, I'm going to eat 2 meals, 1 at 4, 1 at 9 before bed. I won't be hungry before bed. 700 calories per meal. You're kind of able to eat like a regular person eats and probably feel full by the end of the day. You also might want to try it if you're not hungry in the morning and you don't like eating in the morning. Some people don't like that, and it makes sense. Why not just have a coffee? And you can potentially be more productive. Like I mentioned earlier, I don't know if you're productive because you're not eating, or you're productive because you're not getting your meal ready, eating, cleaning up, and all that. You wasted an hour out of your day as opposed to just going right to work. Like I mentioned before, if you like to eat bigger meals, try it if you are able to train during your feeding window. Like I mentioned before, clumping your workouts and your food together is probably good. So if you eat 500 carbs a day, it's probably good idea to eat 200 pre-workout, 200 post-workout, just to make sure that you're covering all your bases between pre and post-workout. Probably don't try it if you're starving every morning. You're trying to gain as much muscle as possible, because you could see a benefit with the increased frequency of muscle protein synthesis. We know muscle protein synthesis rates rise after protein feeding and stay elevated for around 3 hours, and you probably want to eat every 3 to 6 hours. But this probably isn't the case if you only have an 8-hour feeding window. You'd only have 2 meals. In 3 or 4 protein feedings is probably better. Don't try it if you can't train during your feeding window, or you're highly active in your fasting window. So if you're lugging a lot, you're a construction worker, you're lifting things up and all that during your fasting window, you probably want to get a little bit more calories in, or at least a protein feeding, to retain lean body mass. So another reason to not try it, if your NEAT goes down, you stop doing a lot of things because all you can think about is food, you're walking slower, you're not using your hands as much while talking, and you can kind of sense that it's probably not making you feel good, don't do it. So some other ideas to try instead, kind of like a takeaway. Lyle McDonald of bodyrecomposition.com recommends a protein-sparing modified fast. He usually does it 1 or 2 times a week in his rapid fat loss book. What that basically is you just get probably 4 to 5 protein feedings a day, and you minimize carbs and fat to only byproducts of the protein source that you choose. So this is really good because protein is protein sparing, and you'll most likely retain most of your lean body mass. And this could potentially limit muscle protein breakdown because you're keep protein high throughout the day. And what I do is I eat vegetables in the morning. So I eat over 500 carbs in a day, and I keep my first 2 meals at around 50. So I'm able to eat 200 pre, 200 post. And this way I'm getting in some fiber, I'm feeling full, getting in micronutrients from the vegetables, and getting in protein to stimulate muscle protein synthesis. Thank you guys for watching. I hope this was beneficial, and I hope you understand that context is super important, and it's not really good to think in black and white terms. We need to think what is good for you, what are your current goals, and how does your lifestyle work around this. If it's not possible to do this because you have breakfast with your family every morning or something like that, you don't want it to bring down your quality of life. You want exercise and diet to enhance your quality of life. So in this regard, try to do what's best for you. And if you think that you want to skip breakfast and eat more during the night, I think that's an awesome idea. And people are wrong if they say this is the best thing in the world or that's the worst thing in the world. There's always caveats and reasons to do everything, I think. So thank you again for watching. I hope this was beneficial.